everyone, James No Numbers here, and welcome back to another episode of the Political Freedom Fighters Podcast. In this episode, I have with you all here today a Green Party candidate this time. Yeah, we haven't had a Green in a while, but yeah, we finally got a Green Party candidate going. The Greens have recently finished their releasing their candidates list for the 2026 midterm elections, so yeah, this is the first Green in a while that I've brought on. Anyways, this person is running for U.S. House District 8 as a Green, and the only third-party candidate that's running in this specific race. So with that being said, I want to introduce to all of you Mr. Bo Whitehead. How are you, sir?
Hey, doing good. Yeah, it's good to be with you.
That is awesome. My first question to you is, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so like you said earlier, my name's Bo Whitehead. I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've lived here for about 3 years. Me and my wife moved here from Central Georgia. Just kind of moved up here for better opportunities and just a more metropolitan type lifestyle. I come from a farming background. Grew up homeschooled on working on a farm and also worked at my parents' store. They had a jewelry store for a couple years, 2008 through 2010. So then after that, I worked in the mining industry for 7 years in Georgia. There's a lot of chalk mines in Georgia. It's a big industry that a lot of people don't really know much about, but it's a huge industry in Georgia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So I did various jobs in chalk mining, driving a dump truck, training people in procedures, and then also I got my hazardous chemicals endorsement, so I did that for a few years as well. So I was trained in the loading and unloading of different chemicals and mostly acids that were used in the mining process. Now I work in a warehouse for a Fortune 500 company. I am a supervisor in one of the departments, but I started from the ground up. Started at the company about 3.5 years ago, like when we first moved here. Started out just loading trucks by hand, which was a really hard job. Then I ended up going into a security position, did that for about 1.5 years, and then I started the supervisor training program. So kind of have a diverse background in different types of, blue collar, working class type jobs. And yeah, we've really liked it up here in Charlotte. It's a cool area. There's a lot going on. Honestly, just the Carolinas in general have been pretty good to us. So I feel like it's been a good move.
That's awesome. You work like a lot of jobs from what I've seen. Like, wow. How are you able to get so many jobs?
Well, basically, it's I've had to sort of do things like the old-fashioned way and just try to work my way up from scratch. Because I have a GED, so obviously I feel like that's something a lot of people can relate to, where you're not necessarily somebody who has been to college or has these special certifications in IT or anything. So obviously, like, trying these different blue collar routes has been good for me, just for finding opportunities. And a lot of the jobs were within the same companies as well. I did 2 different jobs with my last company, and I've done 3 jobs with the company I'm with right now. And then, some in between and before, but done a little bit of everything. I've worked at a gas station before, I've worked in a deli, been my first job was a janitor at a college. So I've kind of been around the block, and I feel like no matter what someone's doing or their background is, I feel like I can relate. I can definitely relate to what a lot of people are dealing with.
Alrighty, that is awesome. I guess we've gone over a little bit about your history. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Anything specific?
Either personal or electoral. Either or both is fine.
Okay, so I guess on a personal note, but in a more political leaning, obviously, like, growing up in like the Deep South. Traditionally, people kind of come up in like conservative type households. My father is very like conservative Republican, and my mother is a liberal Democrat. So that was an interesting dynamic, growing up in that household. But one of the blessings that I think that I got from that was kind of seeing both sides, and hearing both arguments, and ultimately seeing that there were legitimate concerns and critiques coming from both sides about the other. So I really, from the start, was disillusioned by the two-party system and felt like it was not only counterproductive, but like intentionally manipulative, and almost just kind of feels like it's a controlled opposition, type situation, where every 4 years you have a different administration and they blame the one before them for all their problems. And, then there's the whole issue about the midterms, and it's like, oh, we got to win the midterms, so we have to, do these things to make the base happy, but then they lose the midterms and then nothing gets done, so they just blame the other side, and it's like an endless cycle. But then you also see situations where one party or another has a majority and then they still don't get things done. Right now the Republicans have a pretty big majority and they're not really getting a lot done. And the things they are getting done, quite frankly, I just don't really agree with at all. I feel like a lot of it's just really horrific and just nasty and doesn't represent the will or desires of the people. But then, you can go back and, during Barack Obama's presidency, he did have a Democratic majority in the House and Senate for a while, and they didn't really get a whole lot done with that either. So you can kind of see how there's that issue there. When I was about 18 to 20 or so, and I was really starting to try to learn about politics and everything, I got into a lot of libertarian politics, and I found that kind of interesting. And ultimately, I ended up kind of shying away from that a little bit, just because I felt like maybe some of it just wasn't realistic for me as far as like what I felt was necessary, because definitely I feel like we need, better social programs in this country, and we need, extensions of healthcare and education and everything. So that kind of turned me off from the libertarian side of things, because they're more about, cutting funds and cutting the budget and things like that. So I started leaning more left, and especially like in the last 8 or 10 years, started leaning a lot more left, and looking into different, organizations. And that's always such an interesting and also like messy place to be, because unfortunately I feel like people who are left of center don't really have a big party or organization that they can really plant their feet in and have like unity among their peers. Obviously you have some groups that are trying to do that and have been for some time, the Green Party being one, which is why I ultimately decided to become a Green Party member. Also to, just ballot access was a big part of that as well, because a lot of these other organizations, they might have a good platform and everything, but they, if you can't get on the ballot, that's it's a bit of an issue when running for office. So that was a big plus with the Greens, as well as just the fact that I felt like their platform was pretty good. But, we're hearing a lot of things about the DSA as well right now. So there could be some promising things that come out of that. Unfortunately, I feel like they're pivoting a lot towards running candidates within the Democratic Party. So I'm not really sure how that's going to turn out. Not sure if they're going to turn the party or if the party's going to turn them. But I guess that will be more on a person-to-person basis. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. In 2018, I got married to my wife, Jessica. She is permanently disabled due to a horrific attack that she sustained when she was 16 years old. She was actually attacked by three individuals in the hallway at school when she was in high school, and she was put into a 2-week coma. She ultimately, was revived from this coma and had to go through a lot of physical therapy, and now she's in a pretty good place. She can live a fairly normal life, but she has pretty severe memory problems, especially with her short-term memory, just as well as issues with she can't lift anything heavy, and she's had to have 13 separate brain surgeries, one of which was actually after we got married. It was about maybe like 8 or 9 months after we got married. She had to have an emergency brain surgery. That was a really hard time for us, especially being that we had, just recently got married. And she was on SSI, so she had, full benefits, insurance-wise, as well as a monthly monetary benefit. And after we got married, the Social Security Administration informed us that she was no longer eligible for those benefits because she was married to me. And they said that I made too much money, which it's not very much. It was never too much to me. In fact, I would argue that it's not nearly enough. But ultimately, they did take her benefits away. And not only that, they have now demanded that we pay them back for funds that they had given us after we got married. So not only are we stuck in this situation where she doesn't have any Social Security benefits, but she still has, problems that she needs to get checked out at the doctor. She has these 2 shunts that go from her brain down into her stomach that help release the brain fluid, because the extent of her injury has caused her brain to permanently produce a larger amount of fluid than what is necessary, which obviously creates pressure within the skull. So that pressure has to be released through these shunts and then into her stomach. The issue with that is it's biological matter. So obviously over the years, gunk and grime occurs, and inevitably she'll have to have another surgery where they'll have to go in and actually clean out those shunts. And there's literally no telling how much it'll cost. So that's a really, heart-wrenching situation to be in when you love someone and you want to be with them, and the government basically just says, oh, well, we're not going to give this person any benefits anymore for their disability, as if her condition had changed at all, which it obviously had not. But that's some of the unfairness that that we have in this country. We don't have equality of marriage for people with disabilities. That's a big issue that a lot of people just don't really talk about much in the political spectrum, I think. Obviously, people, they talk about extending Social Security and Medicare and things like that, but you don't really hear a lot of talk about, specific types of situations. So just, for us on a personal basis, that's something that we've had to deal with. And, like my father, for instance, he's on Social Security. He was a truck driver, and he was in a really bad wreck back in 1990 that it was a pretty bad one that left him very disabled, and he had to go to a chiropractor for years, and he's a little bit better now as far as how he can get around, but throughout my whole childhood it was pretty rough. Sometimes he'd fall over and he couldn't get up, and he'd had doctor's appointments all the time, a lot of different medications and pain medications and all sorts of things. So he's had to deal with that, and he doesn't even get insurance from Social Security like how I feel he probably should have. But then on top of that, the benefit that he gets, the monetary benefit, is pretty small. So he has to have a very simple and modest life. He can't really do anything outside of just surviving, which is really unfortunate, because I feel like so many people in this country are dealing with situations like that. And when you're a person who's, in like the lower middle class or, around the poverty line. Things like that that's the difference between, doing okay and not doing okay at all. And I really don't feel like, the people in the two-party system are representing our needs, in regards to situations like that. Shortly after we moved here to North Carolina, we had 3 deaths in my wife's family, pretty much back to back. And we had to keep driving down there to help out with those issues. And as you can imagine, that's a very big financial burden on people. And I feel like that's another issue that you don't ever hear about in politics. Your average funeral costs like $10,000 or $12,000. That's just an average one. That's not like, if you want to have like a nice military funeral or something like that, it's going to be, crazy up there. So, we need to have protections for people, and we need to have, discussions about these everyday situations that we're dealing with, because ultimately everybody's going to be in that situation at some point, where they have to deal with that. And I don't know a whole lot of people that have 10 or 12 grand just sitting around that they can just, throw at somebody 2 or 3 days after one of the worst things that could ever happen to them. So, that's kind of where we're at right now. Just sort of getting over those situations, because that was just a couple years ago and all that happened. And basically it's pretty much work for me. Just trying to make sure that, me and her have everything that we need. I do work night shift, so that's a little bit of an extra burden. Been doing night shift for the last 3.5 years. And before that, my schedule was just crazy, which was part of the reason that I left that industry, because I used to start very early in the morning, and it varied day by day. Some days I would get up at like 4 a.m., and then some days it would be 6 a.m. Some days it would be midnight, and it was just all over the place. And I was doing anywhere from 60 to 80 hours a week. So, when you don't have consistency like that, in your work life, that obviously affects your personal life. You can't plan things. You're never rested. You're at different places at different times. And, that's just a lot to deal with. And that's the kind of thing that everyday Americans are having to deal with all the time, every single day for their whole life, because it's getting to the point now where it's harder and harder for people to even retire at a reasonable age. I knew a lot of people, when we lived in Georgia, that they would absolutely work until they physically couldn't. And a lot of those people would have, like some kind of permanent disability or just chronic health issue that ended up putting them into retirement instead of them planning it and doing it when they wanted to, because ultimately they just had to do what they had to do to make ends meet. And a lot of very dangerous, situations too in these jobs. I know several people when I worked in the mining industry that hurt themselves really bad in accidents. I knew one person that broke their back, one person that broke their neck. I knew another gentleman who was actually one of my good friend's stepdads who actually got cut in half by a train. They fell on the tracks. There were people that got electrocuted to death, a lot of chemical spills. It's just a really dangerous environment to be in. And I just feel like nobody is hearing us, I feel like not enough people are talking about those kinds of situations where, because people talk about wages all the time. Obviously, they need to be a lot higher, and I feel like benefits need to be better. But just the toll that these jobs take on people in general, just so many. Over the years, I've just seen so many OSHA violations and MSHA violations, and just seen people being pushed to their their last breath, more or less, just to try to, keep a job. And that's something I've had to live with and deal with every day of my adult life. So, like I was saying before, no matter what somebody's dealing with, I can at least relate to it to a certain extent.
All right, that's pretty fair. So, why are you running for this race?
So, one of the things that really got me as far as this race is so there's two main candidates that are running. As far as I know, there's not a libertarian candidate. That may change. But there's the Republican incumbent, Mark Harris, and then there's the Democratic challenger, Colby Watson. Mark Harris, the way I would describe him is he is not what I would consider the worst of the Republican camp, but it's still pretty bad. He has a very mixed voting record. Because there have been times where he voted in favor of, we had this issue now that people are talking about with, they're trying to merge the U.S. and Israeli militaries to an extent, at least when it comes to their sharing of data. And this is, to me, a very disturbing thing because the Pentagon recently put them on a very high risk scale when it comes to the risk of espionage. So the idea of us sharing all of our data with them, sharing all of our intel, and allowing them to have knowledge and participation of the equipment that we're developing and everything. I feel like it's a bad idea just to do that with any other country in general, but especially one that has such a spotty record with just human rights violations, and that's something that he's voted in favor of. And then we also just have the issue of flock cameras and data centers. That's becoming a very big subject, and flock cameras are something that I've been aware of for a long time, because that's been kind of part of the discussion, at least in some circles, for like the last 10 or 12 years, because they've been really popping up a lot. And I'm very uncomfortable with that idea, and that's not something that I see either of these candidates talking about. I don't see them talking about personal privacy situations. We had a guy here in Charlotte who was actually arrested recently because a AI camera in another state flagged him as being the person that committed a crime. And then it turned out later that it wasn't him, that he wasn't even in that state, but they had to prove it while he was in jail. And see, that to me, that's just a very, very bad road to go down. I know that there are a lot of cameras everywhere. We live in a new age of technology and everything, but I just find that to be very disturbing, and I feel like it could lead to a lot of civil liberty issues. And it's not something that I see either of these candidates talking about. Same thing with the data centers. For one thing, they're taking up a lot of land. A lot of it is, old farmland or land that's close to residential areas. And they're using quite literally billions of gallons of water. And they claim that when the water comes out of these facilities, because they use it to cool the facility because they produce a lot of heat, doing this. They claim that it gets filtered, but am I really supposed to trust these big mega tech companies that they're going to completely filter our water and just keep it perfectly safe? I don't know if I trust that, especially when they're using so much. And then the electricity that they use is outrageous. They literally, I looked up some numbers recently, and the data centers in the Charlotte area alone use enough electricity to power about 1.8 million electric cars. So just imagine that if everybody in the whole central North Carolina area, essentially, could power their electric vehicles for a year with the same amount of electricity that these data centers are using just in the Charlotte area. I mean, that's outrageous. And that not only weakens our infrastructure for electricity, but then also too, we're catching a lot of the bill because Duke Energy, that's been a big source of talk recently. They're kind of making us pay for a lot of this stuff, and not only that, Duke Energy is making us pay for facilities that they're planning to open up that they haven't even opened up yet. And I'm just not seeing either of these candidates talk about those issues. I feel like that's pretty big stuff when it comes to privacy, water safety, and the electrical grid, plus affordability of power. I mean, those are 4 very big issues that I haven't heard a chirp about. Not to mention the fact that, quite honestly, I feel like there is a complete and total lack of accountability in this country in regards to people within our government and people in like the higher classes, the ruling class, who are committing horrific crimes against children. Earlier this year we had a lot of revelations, with the Epstein files and everything, and not a single high-profile person in America has been arrested. And Kash Patel can go on TV all he wants and say, "Oh, well, we arrested, 50 predators here. We got 100 of them here," but none of them are the people who are actually orchestrating all this stuff. It's all just like regular Joe weirdos. It's not the billionaires. It's not the politicians. It's not the high ups that we can see in the emails were up to no good. I mean, if that email chain was anybody besides rich people, so many of those people would be in prison right now. And it's just not happening. And then on top of that, they want to label everybody that wants to talk about this as a conspiracy theorist. Now, obviously, in the last few months, that's changed a little bit because it's kind of harder to deny it. But I started hearing about this issue many, many years ago. I mean, I first heard about Jeffrey Epstein back in, I think, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. And, started kind of looking into that because I feel like I've been following a lot of these issues for a long time, and just human trafficking issues in general are a big deal. And these candidates just aren't talking about it. The Democrat candidate, he did mention something about the Epstein files in a video about 4 or 5 months ago. And that's the only time he's talked about it. So I can't speak for what he has said, at in-person events. So maybe he's touching on it more and he's just not a big social media guy. But I'm not seeing much on his social media about that. Nor am I seeing anything about it on his website. And I just feel like, if we can't prioritize the safety of children and vulnerable people, then what are we even doing? If we know that people are committing horrific crimes against people and we're not arresting them, what are we even doing? And then, on top of that, what kind of led me into looking into those issues originally was when I was a kid, when I was about 11 years old, my parents started doing foster care. And they became foster parents, and we were taking in kids. And I got to see firsthand, the trauma that a lot of these kids have had to go through. Some of my foster siblings were, horrifically abused by members of their own families that they had been taken away from. And, neighbors and friends of family. So I got to see firsthand, how that affects someone, not only as a child, but later on in life, because some of them did have issues, personal life issues later on in life that were a direct result of horrific abuse. And, even when they hold people accountable, that, like, let's just say it's just an average everyday person that gets caught doing something, they still give them a slap on the wrist. There's a case here in North Carolina that I recently was made aware of, where a young girl was sexually assaulted by her softball coach. And I believe this guy was like around 50 years old, something like that. And the girl was, I believe, 13. And they gave this guy less than a year. I don't remember the exact number of days because it was one of those that was so short that they measured it in days, but it was less than a year. It was like way less than a year. I think it was like 8 or 9 months or something. I mean, that's crazy. How can somebody do that to a child and only get like a year in jail? And the guy was bragging about it to people at work, and that's how he got caught. That's how sick these people are, is that they'll do things like that, and they know that they're either going to get away with it, or even if they do get in trouble, if it's a first offense, they'll, just give them like maybe a year or two at most, and that's it. I met another mother in Charlotte here who, her 11-year-old was groomed and approached by a predator online. And when she went to the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, they basically just told her that they couldn't do anything. Which, I mean, that's just like an awful thing to tell this mother, because this grown man had already sent explicit pictures of himself, asked for pictures as a child, said all kinds of nasty, horrific things, highly illegal activity, and the police were just going to do nothing. And I haven't heard a peep from either of these candidates about, local stories like that. These are the types of things that are affecting people every day. We have a young girl, I believe she was 2 or 3 years old. Her name was Dominique Moody, that lived here in the Charlotte area, and her caregivers were horrifically abusing her. And this was reported to Child Services multiple times. And they went there and did checkups, and the girl ultimately died because they were beating her and starving her, and they had her living in a dog crate. And there were people that knew about it who were reporting it, and nothing got done. So whether it's the big elites, just getting away scot-free with no jail time, or the average everyday people who are doing these things and getting very little jail time, there's just a lot going on. People are just being hurt, and people aren't being taken care of. And it really just disgusts me to have all these things happen around me, and nobody even wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to try to figure out any kind of way to hold these people more accountable, or to, at the very least, do the work that is necessary to prevent it from happening. And, that's just something that's very near and dear to my heart. Not to mention just the general exploitation that we see happening around the world, as far as workers' rights. Here in the United States, I feel like we could make a lot of progress, but we've also made a lot of progress in the past. There has been, a gradual buildup, thanks to a lot of people in the labor movement, unions, et cetera. And a lot of places in the world don't have access to those luxuries, and they don't have the ability to do that. We have a lot of people, like in the Congo, for instance. Some people might remember the movie Hotel Rwanda. I think that was Leonardo DiCaprio, maybe, that did that movie, possibly. Can't remember. Anyway, it's kind of an old movie, but it's based on a true story. The situation in the Congo has been very bad for, honestly, a couple hundred years, because of just imperialistic exploitation of that land. And there are literally tens of millions of people who have lost their lives in that area because of that. And it's not something that anybody talks about. And the issue is, at the end of the day, the reason that those people are suffering is because you have large corporations that are owned by, Americans and Europeans mostly, and sometimes Chinese companies as well, that go in and they mine different things like cobalt and other, types of things and minerals and such. And they're basically using these people as slaves. if you've ever seen any of the videos or pictures of the conditions in those mines, it's bad. I mean, they have literally children working in these mines, and if you don't meet your quota, that's your head. It was even worse a couple hundred years ago, when you had King Leopold, who was the one that was overseeing all that, and they were it was rubber is what they were after over there. And if you didn't meet your rubber quota, they'd cut your hands off, or they'd cut your children's hands off. And ultimately, we're reaping the benefits of all this exploitation as a society. These materials are used to make cell phones and other electronics, and I feel like it's our responsibility, just as human beings, to try to make sure that things like that aren't happening, because that's just a horrific thing to allow to happen. And it's not like it just started happening yesterday. It's like I said, it's been a continuation for really a couple hundred years, and the last 30 years or so have been extra bad, because now they have issues with militias, and they've been sort of in just like a state of civil war. And you look at a situation like that, and you would think that the international community would want to come together and, one, hold the companies accountable for exploiting these people, and then two, figure out what the situation is with these militias massacring people and find a way to stop it from happening, and do it in a way that doesn't involve invading them, because everybody always runs to the conclusion of, oh, we just stay out of it or we invade them, or we stay out of it or we invade them. It's like all the United States knows how to do is to just not care or drop bombs. And we have to find a better way to do things. We have to find a humane way to treat our fellow human beings. We have a lot of situations even here closer to home, like Haiti. I know a lot of people that are from Haiti, and they're wonderful people. They're awesome. They're very kind-hearted and sweet people, and they work very hard. And they've had to deal with just some of the worst oppression and poverty imaginable. I mean, their literacy rates are extremely low, because most of them don't have access to quality education. Most of the ones that do get access to education is through a religious organization like the Catholic Church or something like that, which is fine. But then if they don't have the money to pay for that, then they don't get it. And of course, it's a very similar situation there, where you have companies from outside coming in and exploiting the people and paying them very little and making them work in horrific conditions. So then, no wonder people that live in places like that would like to come to the United States, or, to Canada or somewhere in Europe to try to find a better life. And I'm just not hearing a peep out of these candidates about these issues. And I just decided that at the end of the day, if no one else was going to stand up and just speak for humanity and just speak for just common decency, then I would just have to be the one to do it. And I would rather be doing something else with my Saturday night, to be quite honest. But I feel like it's important for us to draw a line and be able to acknowledge when something's wrong and when it needs to stop. And a lot of our tax dollars are going towards some of these things, some of these really horrific things, to get back into the issue of, Israel again. We pay for a lot of their military expenditures. We give them a lot of money, and we also supply them with a lot of weapons, as well as equipment like bulldozers and tracos and such. And this is currently being used for what can only be described as a genocide. And I think a lot of people have only discovered this more recently, because the onslaught of social media has really brought people together in a way that wasn't possible before. Before, you might see a story every now and then, from Al Jazeera or something like that, where they might, talk about an issue like this. But then, you just it goes to the wayside and people aren't thinking about it. But this has been happening since 1948. And there's been times that were rougher than other times, but that's a long time. That's a long, long time to be doing this to people. And it's been happening right under everybody's nose, and we've been paying for it. And I just think that that's wrong. And, I have people who live in Palestine or the West Bank contact me through Instagram, and they just beg me to help them. They just beg me to tell their story. And they show me the pictures and the videos of them and their children sleeping in tents because their town has literally been blown up. There's a guy that contacted me recently where his child, a very young child, he didn't tell me the age, but looked be maybe, 4 or 5 years old, has a really bad rash all over their body. They don't know what it is, and they can't get it treated. And they just have to live like that perpetually. And, these people are being pushed out of their homes. These people are being deliberately targeted. And you have people in that government flat out saying that they just want to get all those people out of that area and just develop it for themselves. And, the last 25 years or so, the United States has been fighting a lot of wars in the Middle East. We have overthrown the governments of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Now, more recently, they're working on Iran because they're one of the more powerful, countries in that region. And, you have people in the Israeli government who are already talking about, at some point they're probably going to invade Turkey and Egypt because they want to extend the borders, throughout the whole Middle East, because they essentially want the borders of Israel to, correlate with what it says, in the Old Testament. And I just really feel like religious fanaticism in general is something that we completely don't want in a government, because that leads to horrific atrocities. And it doesn't matter if it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever it is. If you have religious fanatics running a country, that's a recipe for disaster. So I just don't feel comfortable, supplying all these people with our tax dollars when they're doing that with it. It'd be one thing if we were paying for wells to be built, if we were paying for, farm equipment so that people had food and things like that. I'm all about helping people if we can. But, just every time I look at my check and I see they took some out and I know they're just spending it on bombs, it just pisses me off. It just really does. And it doesn't matter if it's there or anywhere else in the world. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in Russia right now who probably feel the same way about what's going on, with the Ukraine. And, ultimately, I have more free speech than they do. So I'm able to speak on these issues publicly without having to worry about my safety, at least not too much. Maybe I'll worry about it a little bit, but, I should be all right. But I think that while we have these freedoms to be able to say what we need to say, we need to go ahead and get out there and speak it. And I just want to keep it real with people. And I just want to say, I hear you, I see you, and I feel your pain. And I want people to know that they are loved and that they're appreciated and that there is a way for us to move forward and live in peace and live in prosperity, and that we can have all those things and be equal with each other at the same time. And we don't have to keep fighting each other, whether it's, fighting each other here or fighting people anywhere else. And I just don't really feel like that message has been communicated by, either one of the candidates. And that's frustrating, to be just like an average everyday working person, and you don't feel like the people who are supposed to be representing you are representing you. And then even when you have someone come along to challenge the person representing you, it's still not that great. Really the main thing that Colby Watson has said that I felt was, a decent thing was that he did say that he wants, big money out of politics and that he doesn't want to take, corporate donations, which that's great. I don't want to do that either. And quite frankly, I think that it shouldn't even be legal for, political candidates to take corporate donations. I feel like we need to overturn Citizens United. We don't need big corporations donating to, candidates or super PACs. And quite frankly, I don't think that we should have super PACs at all. I think that it should be all grassroots and that they should take all the money out of it. And if you start taking the money out of it, I think you'll see that a lot of people who are sleazy and want to wheel and deal kind of start getting out of politics because they're not going to have much of an incentive to be involved anymore. And I feel like we could decentralize a lot of the systems of government without cutting the benefits that go to people. We have honestly like millions of people that work for the government in different fashions. And a lot of them are barely getting by and they're just clerks and, they're very underpaid. I'm not talking about those people. I'm not talking about the people at the post office, but, the people that are in the legislature that, are allowed to participate in insider trading. And, you see it all the time where somebody had a net worth of, $100,000 when they got elected. And then 4 or 5 years later, they're worth like $8 million. That doesn't make any sense. It's not possible. It would take you like your whole lifetime to accumulate that much money. So it's obvious that they're up to no good. We have to have some people in Congress who can start looking into this corruption. And that's one of the big things I want to do. I want to not only call for accountability on all the issues that I've just mentioned, but I want to find the corruption right there in that chamber. I want to find out who's doing what, and I'll expose them. I don't care. If I find out that somebody's doing something and I can prove it, I'll show the receipts. I'll go on Instagram and do a live, and I'll snitch on everybody. And if they want to try to throw me in prison or do something like that after the fact, well then we'll just deal with that. But we have to start being brave and standing up against this horrific system because it's not representing us at all.
I absolutely agree, and you actually answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you, but
yeah, I tend to get long-winded, man.
No, that's all right. You answered like most of your platform except for the one about ICE. If you want to talk about it, you can.
Yeah, so that's one thing, and I think that honestly goes back into a lot of the other stuff that we were talking about before, where you have people who live in underdeveloped countries who a majority of the time the underlying reason for their strife is because a larger imperialistic country is exploiting them for their labor and is also exploiting their resources. Because whether it's Africa or the Caribbean or Latin America, you have a lot of rich soil, you have a lot of resources. These people should be doing great. And there were times in the past when they were, because they do have access to so much. It doesn't make sense, for people who live in places like that to not honestly just have it made. If you live in a country where you have just resources everywhere, natural resources that are being mined or that are being cultivated or farmed, those people should have a good, strong middle class, but they don't. So then what happens? They try to move somewhere else and find a better life. You can't blame them for that. It's not their fault that they were born in that situation. So they come here or to, Canada or Europe or somewhere. And, one of the things I've seen recently, and we've, all seen, anybody that's paying attention, is that you have these huge ICE raids that are going on where you have guys literally running around in masks, sometimes in plain clothing and in unmarked vehicles, going and rounding people up. And, this isn't really what was sold to the American people. Trump isn't exactly articulate when he speaks, but, one of the things that he did say was that, that they were going to be going after criminals, gang members, cartel members, people like that. And that, the people that were, the average everyday working people, that, yeah, they might still get deported, but they would, give them assistance, and they would try to help them find a path to come back legally later. But instead of that, what we've seen is that you have these for-profit prison companies building huge facilities. They're making these deals with ICE where they're buying these facilities, oftentimes paying way more than the facility is worth, because it's almost like almost like somebody's laundering some money or something, quite frankly. I can't prove that, but a lot of these numbers don't add up, when you look at how much they're paying for some of these buildings versus what they're actually supposed to be worth. It's almost like somebody's getting paid off. But anyway, yeah, for-profit prison companies, and they just have regular prison guards in there, and they're literally just throwing whole families into these facilities. I don't know if you've kept up with, what's going on in Delaney Hall, that facility in New Jersey. That is I feel like a really good example of a ICE facility that has gotten a lot of attention, and we're getting, an inside scoop on what's going on in there, because there are reports that people are being given food that has maggots in it. Obviously, right now, the weather, has been very hot recently. I seriously doubt that the air conditioning is decent. We have sexual assaults going on in there. I mean, they literally have young girls, underage girls, are getting pregnant in these facilities. And they claim that the only people that have access to these girls are the guards. So all logic points to think that the guards are sexual assaulting these children. And then, when people bring up these charges and bring up, these allegations, ICE just doesn't want anything to do with it. They don't want to talk about it. It'd be one thing if you had a crime like that get committed, and then they came out and they made a statement and they said, we found out this was happening. We found out who did it. They're being held accountable. We're going to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. It'd be one thing if they did that, but they're not even doing that. They just flat out deny that these things are happening. When you have multiple people saying that it's happening, and you have confirmation that these girls are getting pregnant. And then on top of that, you have situations where people have been found to not have any kind of criminal record at all. I believe it's about 90% of the people at these facilities typically don't have any kind of criminal record at all. They're being held in basically a prison. And then, it begs the question, well, why are they being held there for so long? Because people are being held there for months, even after they've signed their deportation papers. There are a lot of people where I've seen that they literally signed, self-deportation papers where they agreed to self-deport, legally binding document, months ago, and they're still holding them. No criminal record. It's because they're making money off of holding them there. It's sick. It's absolutely sick. I mean, that's not humane at all. I'm all for, keeping the country safe and, cracking down on gangs and cartels. I don't want dangerous people on the street. If someone's a murderer or a rapist or a pedophile, or they're, smuggling fentanyl or something, of course I'd want them to be held accountable. My whole campaign is about wanting people to be okay and not be exploited. But when you go and arrest a whole family, including children, pregnant women, elderly people, and you just keep them in a cell for months on end to make profit, that's That's not cool with me. I can't be about that. And personally, I think that at this point, that organization has gone downhill so much that I don't really think it can be reformed. And it's always been rough. I mean, we even saw, I remember the first time hearing about the kids in cages story, when Obama was president. So this isn't a new issue. I can only imagine, the kind of terrible atrocities that have happened decades in the past that people just never heard about. But it's just been really ramped up, and we just got to stop it. I really feel like we just got to shut the whole operation down and replace it with something that is actually humane and wants to help people. And local, state, and federal law enforcement, I think, have enough resources where they can handle gang members and cartel people, and they can do their own targeted investigations and targeted arrests, based on intel. And they need to do so in a professional manner. But, the idea that, like, for instance, a few months back, they did Operation Charlotte's Web, where they had ICE here in Charlotte, and they were just wreaking havoc. There was one guy that they found, give me a second, that they arrested a gentleman, and he turned out to be an American citizen. And then what did they do? They dropped him off on the side of the road and just threw all of his stuff there on the side of the road, and they just left him there. And there have been multiple cases where ICE has done things like that. There was a Haitian lady, I forget what state it was. I want to say it was either New Jersey or New York, where they left her on the side of the road, miles away from home, and it was very cold. It was in February, and she didn't have, proper winter clothing, and she actually froze to death. She died of hypothermia. ICE just left her right there on the side of the road. They're doing stuff like that all the time. Tomorrow here in Charlotte, they're going to have a memorial for that gentleman that was just shot by ICE a couple days ago. And, some people might have seen that story where it was supposed to be a targeted arrest, but they were actually looking for someone else. It wasn't even him. And they claimed that he, tried to hit them with their car, that he tried to, flee the scene or whatever. But they were dressed in plain clothing and driving a plain vehicle without, riding on it. So if you're just driving down the road and a couple guys with ski masks just come at you with guns, I mean, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to just stand there and be like, oh, excuse me, are you here to kill me? Are you here to arrest me? What are you here to do? No, you're going to get the fuck out of Dodge. Like, that's what any reasonable person would do. And they shot this guy and pulled him out of the car, and he bled to death right there on the asphalt. And, yeah, there's nothing pisses me off more than stuff like that. I just can't stand that. Like I said, we got to make sure we do get the bad people, but, whether they're an American citizen or an immigrant, if they're bad and they're doing crimes, let's get them and make sure it's taken care of. But if you're just going to work, maybe those people need help. They're here for a reason, and it's not their fault that their country has been exploited. Maybe we could start actually working with some of these countries and try to help them with their infrastructure, and try to hold companies accountable that are exploiting these people, so that at some point, maybe a lot of people will just want to stay home. Most of these people don't want to just willy-nilly just go and move to another country. I've had a lot of conversations with people, who are immigrants, and at the end of the day, a large percentage of them, they would have preferred to stay in their home country, but they felt like they didn't have a choice. And when people are in a desperate situation like that, we shouldn't punish them. We shouldn't treat them like they're criminals, and we shouldn't treat them like they're less than, because everybody in this country, except for Native Americans, is either an immigrant or is the ancestor of an immigrant. So, we have to start working together as one people and actually start loving and having some compassion for each other.
I agree. So, I guess this next question I want to ask, I usually ask with some third parties because I figured this is important. So, given that this district is a red district, Mark Harris is the incumbent. I gotta ask, why can't the Democrat win this race?
Sorry, you were breaking up pretty bad. I couldn't hear you.
All right, let me repeat the question. So, this next question I want to ask you, I usually ask third parties a lot of the time because I feel like it's important. I want to know why can't because this district is a red district. I gotta ask, why can't the Democrats win this race?
I think that there's, a lot of issues with that, but this is sort of a rural district. I mean, obviously you have parts of Charlotte and Concord are a part of it, but there's also a lot of like smaller, more country type communities, and typically those communities do tend to be a little bit more conservative leaning. You have a lot of people that are highly religious, and maybe they have a very strong stance on abortion, or maybe they aren't really into the LGBTQ community and all that. And it's a little bit hard to paint a broad stroke on people, but I think a lot of it just does have to do with that. Whereas if it was a district like the 12th district, which is the other parts of Charlotte, but then also the areas like west and north of Charlotte, it is more blue because you have more metropolitan areas. And typically those areas just do seem to be a little bit more on the progressive or liberal side, because you have more people talking about issues of public transportation and things like that, different like issues with the water and with energy, whereas I feel like a lot of people who live in the country are focused more on some of these like broader social issues, maybe Second Amendment issues and things like that.
Alrighty, fair
Which
enough.
I understand, because I grew up in a very rural area, and I'm a firearm owner myself. I don't necessarily think that we need to go around confiscating people's guns or anything, but obviously like responsible gun control is something that I think would highly benefit the United States, especially in regards to people with severe mental health issues. We don't really have a lot of protections for that. There's been a lot of cases where people were literally going around telling everybody that they were going to commit a massacre, and then it was just allowed to happen for whatever reason. And these people are just allowed to purchase these weapons. But yeah.
Alrighty. So, how's the campaign going?
It's been very interesting. It's also been quite the headache, because I am doing everything pretty much by myself. I have had some help from my brother. He's helped me with some tech stuff, but like as far as like filing all the paperwork and everything, had to do pretty much all of that myself. The Green Party did pay the filing fees for getting me on the ballot and everything, which I was very thankful for, and they were very gracious with that whole process. But yeah, there's been a lot of filings, a lot of research that I've had to do to kind of figure out what it is that needs to be done. Like just tomorrow, I'm gonna have to get in the FEC website and file some financial reports. And I have had some help too. A guy named Josh Bradley. He's actually one of the candidates. Yeah, you interviewed him a little while back. He helped me out with the website. So he did me a solid there and helped me with my website a little bit. So I appreciate that, Josh, if you're listening. But yeah, besides that, it's just been Yeah, it's been a lot of research and a lot of just like trying to talk to people, just kind of face-to-face interactions, as well as just doing social media content. I have mostly been doing Instagram. Uh, my Facebook is really more just kind of private, just more for like family use and stuff. But so yeah, it's been pretty much all Instagram. I thought about doing TikTok as well, but I've heard that since they switched ownership, that the censorship is pretty bad. So I've had people tell me like to not even waste my time with TikTok because they said I would probably just get banned. So yeah, it's been a lot of that, just trying to make content, get the word out, trying to collaborate with other uh, candidates and content creators, and try to get new perspectives on how people feel about the issues. Um, Coming up, I will be participating in the Charlotte Labor Day Parade, so that's going to be fun. Michael Dublin's going to be there as well, and there may be one or two other candidates depending on what happens. We'll see. That'll be a nice fun event. Right now that I've got the website up and have my donation platform and everything set up, I'm going to start trying to do a little bit more as far as face-to-face interactions, and I'm going to start reaching out to some different groups and clubs and different people to try to see if we can collaborate and just have conversations with people and get their perspective on things. One of the big things I wanted to start doing was to contact business owners in the area, just to kind of see like what issues they're having as a small business, especially black owned or immigrant owned businesses, and just kind of hear them out, and not so much try to sell myself to them, but hear what it is that they have to say. What's important to them? What do they struggle with? What would they like to see out of a representative? Are there any particular laws that they, feel are unjust, or are there, laws that they feel, should be, passed? So, that's going to be really exciting. That's something that I'm planning on doing over the course of the next couple months, just to try to get the ball rolling. Because I am a little bit behind, because I did make this decision a little bit late. And ultimately, that just kind of came down to feeling so disappointed in the way it was turning out with the Democrat candidate, and just feeling like there wasn't really a good representation for progressive or left leaning constituents, and I just felt like I had to fill that gap. But unfortunately, that put me in a situation where I am behind a little bit. If I'd thought ahead if I thought I was going to do this, I probably would have got started, way back in like January or something. So I'm excited, and I think it's going to go well. It's going to be small and grassroots, but I think it's going to go well, and I think a lot of people are, at the very least, going to hear a good and positive message.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think I feel like I really covered a lot of stuff. I think the main thing that we all just really need to start addressing as a nation is that this two-party system really is just toxic, and that ultimately they protect themselves and each other. And when it comes down to it, even when they pretend like they oppose each other, and sometimes do in actuality, when the going gets tough, they end up having each other's backs. You see what's going on in New York, especially with these DSA candidates are starting to win. You have people in the Democratic Party that are straight up saying that we should all just go and vote for Republicans now. And I think that's kind of crazy. And you see, people who are in like liberal media, saying similar things. And I just find that quite disturbing, to be honest. And I feel like that should really show us, just how, sneaky and vile that two-party system is. And I think that ultimately we're going to have to create our own system from outside, and, get candidates in who can actually start bringing forth real change. And it's not going to happen overnight. This is not a battle that we're going to win in this election cycle. This is something that we need to start thinking about the next 3 or 4 election cycles. We need to get as many people in there as possible to stir things up and to push legislation, not only for the purpose of trying to get change, but also exposing the people who refuse to allow it to happen. Because there are a lot of things that your average American are in favor of that it never gets introduced as legislation. But if you have someone in Congress or in Senate who introduces legislation on universal health care or on, legalizing marijuana or, one of these other, hot button issues, and then you see who opposes it, one of my strategies would be, and a strategy I would suggest for others would be if I introduce legislation and then it gets, shot down by like 90%, let's go through the list. Let's make a video, all the people that voted against it. Let's make them famous, Let's really talk about this, because that's one thing I feel like a lot of people are starting to figure out now that was ignored in the past, whereas we have the ability with social media to get messages out and to, be effective in our messaging. So we can really expose the people who are keeping everything down. And then when it, comes their turn to, be reelected, we can get somebody else in there. And on top of that, I feel like this is really only going to happen if people start coming together. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. I feel like when you get left of center, there's a lot of division there. And we're going to have to just start working together on things. And, you have some people that will say, oh, well, I don't like the Green Party because of this or that. But ultimately, the Green Party is really the only, leftist party that has ballot access in a large number of states. I believe in the 2024 election, I think they had ballot access in like 37 states, something like that. Other parties just don't have that. So ultimately, if you don't like the Green Party, well, maybe you should consider joining, and we can all have a discussion and we can try to make it better, because it's not going to do us any good to have this infrastructure here if we're not using it. And then, if you really, really, really don't want to join, actually start working on the legal work to get ballot access for whatever party you're a part of, and then maybe, people over here can start going over there. But at the end of the day, yeah, we're just going to have to put our heads together, because if you take, all these different groups and put them together, it'd be millions of people. And we'd be a force to be reckoned with if that happens. So, we can't have any more of this infighting. And that doesn't mean that you align yourself with somebody that you feel is, a toxic person, or you feel they've done something wrong or whatever. But just because you disagree with somebody on like 1 or 2 issues, that shouldn't be enough of a reason that you just altogether throw the whole thing out. We're going to have to really start organizing. And I think that's the main thing. And that's one thing that I'm seeing happen in the DSA and PSL a lot, that they are starting to organize a lot. And I think that, if the 3 of us, all got together and started organizing together, I think we get a lot more done. So, yeah.
That is awesome. With that being said, I hope you all have enjoyed this video. If you all have enjoyed, please hit the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Hit the notification bell in case you want to get any notifications on any new episodes of the Political Freedom Fighters podcast. And I will be linking Robert's, all of Bo's social media and his website in the description below in case you all want to check it out for yourself. And yeah, with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.